Welcome to the Science of Parenting podcast, where we connect you with research based information that fits your family. We'll talk about the realities of being a parent and how research can help guide our parenting decisions. I'm Mackenzie Johnson, parent of two littles with their own quirks, and I'm a parenting educator.
And I'm Lindy, a professor of human nutrition, guest co host, and a mom to one sweet angel baby and one young ferocious eater.
I know we were debating if it's ferocious, voracious, ferocious. There's a lot of options. I like ferocious. You did good.
I think did I do right? Is that the
I
right
think
one?
you did right. I think you got it. We're still practicing.
No, no,
I'm
I
at an
think
advantage.
I think it's voracious, but
Marie.
either way, he likes
We
to
will
eat a
figure that
lot.
out. We will figure that out before next episode. Either way, Lindy's here. Yes, and we are. We're just excited to have you here in season 10. Lindy as our guest co-host as we talk all about food and kids and parenting and feeding and all of it and eating and all the things. But yeah, so last week we did our introduction to this season, right? We talked about all the different things that influence why we eat what we eat. And that we talked about that there was a model, aka framework
Mhm.
basically,
Oh,
that like there are layers that influence our child as an individual. There are factors from the family level and factors from like the broader community culture. So all kinds of good stuff that we're going to kind of talk a little bit more about this season. And but what's today, Lindy?
today we're going to narrow in a little bit and we're going to examine how our attitudes and beliefs as parents influence what our kids eat.
Yes. And those are called feeding styles, right?
Feeding styles,
Feeding
yes.
styles.
Mhm.
And you're going to find out why I'm really excited about them. Well, when am I not excited? Sometimes I'm not excited, but I'm really excited about this in particular. Feels like such a perfect fit. So, feeding styles. Well, I love to start with a definition. That's a thing you've heard, and now here you are. Define it for me, Lindy. What's a feeding
Mhm.
style?
Yes, so Hughes et al. Defines feeding styles as the broad approach that parents take to feed children and the emotional climate in which feeding occurs.
Awesome. Yes. I like
Mhm.
the I'm like, yeah, of course it's the approach we take to feeding our kids, but I love the component of the emotional climate. I like that that's a part of it too, of like the style you have. It's also part of the climate we create. Yeah.
Yeah, well, and we're going to talk about this, but responsiveness, responsive feeding,
Yeah.
it includes things not only about that emotion, or not only about how we feed our children, but the environment around how we feed our children,
Mhm.
that kind of thing. So I think emotional climate is very important to include.
Yes. I love a term. I love
Mhm.
when something is just described very accurately. Love that. But the reason, or one of the reasons I am so excited about this episode is that so Lindy gathered a lot of the research, which like typically get to do. And so Lindy, of course, has the expertise. So she shared all this great stuff. I got to dig into it a little bit. And literally in this report, uh, that it was talking about parenting styles and how feeding styles are really built off of them. And I loved that parallel of we've talked about parenting styles lots of different times. Especially holy cow, all the way back in season one. And I'm like, other times too, it comes up. But yeah, that feeding styles is really built around the same concepts.
Yes, yeah. Feeding styles is an adaptation of parenting styles, and we're going to talk about that today. But I also just want to say that I think a lot of what we're going to talk about you can find in other seasons of Science of Parenting,
Ooh, good.
that we're going to talk about today, because we're going to talk a lot about autonomy today and how we support autonomy,
Oh.
right?
Mm-hmm.
But specifically, as we getting back to feeding styles, so the report that we continue to reference today from Healthy Eating Research says, like parenting styles, feeding styles are characterized in terms of one, demandingness, and two, responsiveness.
Okay.
So when we
Two
talk about,
dimensions.
yep, when we talk about demandingness, we're talking about how much the parent encourages or controls eating. So kind of two sides of the coin right there. So talk about limit setting, rule expectations, and then responsiveness is the other one. And that's how parents respond to the child's cues and needs to encourage eating and support child's developing autonomy. There's that word, autonomy.
Ugh,
Mhm,
autonomy, right?
mhm.
Independence, choice, right? Those would be synonyms for autonomy. And I love that the dimensions are literally the same, right? So we talk about demandingness and parenting style too, of like having appropriate expectations, asserting authority in an appropriate way. And but these are really honed in. You kind of gave an example earlier um when we were talking through this of I was like, yeah, kind of the parenting style is the broad, right? And we're
Mhm.
narrowing down to kind of one category of dimension of parenting when we're looking at feeding. So right, we're looking at like the physical health and physical eating and like yeah, it's what it might look like with feeding, right? That authoritative style or that well, spoiler, I'm starting to give them away. uh, but yeah, but I love that it's the same dimensions. Yeah, and I always love a definition. I think that's a great place to start.
Mhm.
So all kinds of similarities. So let's hear about these feeding styles specifically. So there's four, right? Just like parenting styles. There's four.
Yes. Yeah, yep. So Hughes and colleagues published the different styles in a text called Families, Food, and Parenting. So the
Mhm.
four styles that they talk about are authoritative, authoritarian, indulgent, and uninvolved. But I'm going to
Okay.
first start with authoritative
Yes.
and explain what that is. So, again, we're going to go back to those two different components of feeding styles, parenting styles, the
Mhm.
demandingness and the responsiveness. So when we think of an authoritative style is high demandingness, but then
Mhm.
also high responsiveness.
Yes. So both high.
Both
Both
high.
are both
Mhm.
high.
Yes, both high.
So then the one of the things in this report was kind of this table. So there's like kind of the formal definition and yeah, that it might look like being like offering reasoning for why we're offering this or things like that. It also says parent involvement, being nurturing and having some structure around feeding. And so then something else we want, we're like, okay, that's what the report says. What do Lindy and Mackenzie say? Right. And so we're like workshopping, okay, how are we gonna tell everybody? How are we gonna describe this authoritative style? And we thought of a menu. That's a word picture. You're
Mhm.
bringing in our Lori vibes here, Lindy.
Mm,
Yeah, the
yes.
idea of like a menu is really a really good like description of this style, right? That it's about choice and structure. And yeah, when
Yep.
we're authoritative, it's like having a menu. I
Yeah,
love that.
exactly. You wanna put some structure around what what they're doing. Again, that demandiness, how much
Mhm.
an parent encourages or controls. So you wanna encourage them. You don't
Yeah.
wanna control per se, but you wanna set those expectations. But then
Mhm.
again, important that high responsiveness. You wanna be responsive to those child's cues. You want to foster that, independence, the autonomy to do
Yeah.
what they want. So hopefully a
Mhm.
menu is a little bit easier way of remembering this than
Yeah.
thinking, "Oh, yeah, authoritative, high demandingness, high
Uh,
responsiveness."
and I
Mhm.
think one of the other reasons I like this like word picture of having a menu being associated with authoritative feeding style is like when I get the menu from a restaurant, like I don't fight about it, right? Like it just is.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
I also kind of like that of like, yeah, with authoritative, it's like these are just the choices. It's not about control per se, as much as like this is what we're willing to offer. And so I love that word picture of a menu. So
Mhm.
then what about authoritarian? Again, another parenting style word. Those two are the same.
Mhm.
Authoritarian. What about that feeding style?
Yeah, so authoritarian, going back to if we're thinking about those two dimensions, so it is high in demandingness. So
Mhm.
thinking about it's higher in controlling what we're eating. Authoritarian, you're controlling, but it's low in that responsiveness. So you're not really responding to child's cues in the same way that you would be if you're just following their lead. You're being responsive.
Yeah, that makes sense. And the table of characteristics tells us this style would often be more restrictive, sometimes even like punitive or rejecting of the child and what the child wants. And that it's often like power assertive or like I'm in charge. That the parent has that. And so I thought a good way to describe this is basically like the parent decides and the child complies,
Hmm.
right? Like so if we are have an authoritarian feeding style, it can be things like well, you can eat it whether you like it or not, right? It can be, I mean, even like we talk about the clean plate club, that idea that you have to eat everything on your plate, right? But the parent sets these rules and all of this stuff, and the child just has to comply. That would be more authoritarian, right?
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
and I feel like this is one I think of that would be easy to fall into.
Mm.
As a type A person, and then also B, someone who does all their work in the nutrition and health space because you
Yes.
want to make sure I want to make sure my kids are eating the healthy thing they want. However,
Yes.
we might talk, I don't think we'll talk about it this as specific as maybe one of the other styles, but that can backfire in a lot of ways if we
Mm,
are teaching our children that food is a punitive thing or this is all they have
yes.
to offer. Again, we're not supporting that autonomy or letting them make their own decisions around food.
Mhm, and Lori always jokes about like, when it comes to the temperament trait of regulation or, like, rhythm, that parents want to control the eat, sleep, poop, right?
Mhm.
Like, it's like an instinctive thing, like, "I am the adult in charge of this small person. This is the thing I must control," and it's like, well, there's a balance. I mean, like, literally everything else in life, there's a balance.
Yes,
And yeah, too much control and without being responsive to the child's needs and right, if we're, like, being dismissive or rejecting or punitive, that's not really the offering the warmth and responsiveness that we want.
exactly. Yes, we're
Mhm.
teaching them one way to eat versus the menu of ways to eat.
Yeah. Oh, there it is again. I know, and I was like, "We're working so hard to get these food puns." Oh, and I forgot to mention earlier, very excited about the title, right? The
What is it?
title of this episode being "What We Bring to the Table."
Mhm,
We're gonna talk about
mhm,
that a little bit later, but I am
mhm.
excited to tell you about that. Um, okay, so the third style, indulgent. So in parenting styles, we often would call that permissive, but I think indulgent's a good word for it too. I like that word, indulgent.
Yeah, I feel like it's a good food word for,
Yeah,
to
yeah.
continue with our food puns.
Yes.
We did not plan this one, maybe Hugh did, but I
Hughes,
don't know.
yeah,
Yeah,
Hughes and
thank you,
colleagues.
Hughes. Mhm. But indulgent, so again, going back to those 2 dimensions, indulgent is low demandingness, so no control,
Mhm,
not that structure, whether it be kind of good or bad structure, but high in terms of responsiveness. So,
mm,
you want a cupcake? Okay, here's a cupcake, something like that.
mhm. So the characteristics are, yes, warmth and acceptance, but no monitoring, right? So not really being involved in the choices that are offered or things like that. So we thought a good description for this was just kind of a free for all, right?
Mhm,
Whatever a child wants is what they get, and not really a lot of times, yeah, not having the structure, like you said, of
mhm.
oh well, these are things we're going to offer, or we're going to offer some balance, or yeah, we eat cupcakes sometimes, but like I'm not going to let you eat like 9 of these cupcakes right now. That
Yeah,
doesn't seem
yeah.
like a good choice for us. Like
Or cupcakes every night for dinner. Yes, of course.
yes.
Yeah, yeah, that's a perfect way of saying it. It is about like having
Mhm,
that low demandingness means that there isn't any of that structure put into place so that your child can make that decision
mhm.
to maybe not have a cupcake for dinner tonight.
Yep, yeah, and it is like the free for all, and I remember when we were talking about parenting styles in that episode, we talked a little bit about synonyms of these different, like, dimensions, and so, yeah, for, like, demandingness, we talked about, like, expectations, but one of the other ones was authority, and I liked that word, and I think that fits here with indulgence, like, if you are giving up all of your authority when it comes to
Mhm.
food. And yeah, not that I'm not going to decide every single thing that goes in your mouth, but like I'm going to have some influence, right? I'm going to make sure you have options. I'm going to make sure sometimes we eat something besides cupcakes, like
Yeah.
sometimes
Mhm.
something else. So yeah, that indulgent, I agree. I like that. That term is the one. I like a good term. That's the one for that one. Somebody
Mhm.
did that right.
Yes.
All right. And then our fourth one, right? Pretty similar to the parenting style again. We might have used the word like negligent in this fourth category. But I like it uses the word uninvolved, right? I like that too. It's a good
Yes, so
description of it.
yeah, uninvolved is, kind of exactly what it says it is. It is you don't have any involvement, or take an active role per se in your child's feeding. So it is low demanding and low responsiveness. So you're not responding to those cues. You're not providing any of that structure. It's just uninvolved.
Hmm. And so yeah, this has little control, little involvement when it comes to feeding. And we thought like this is kind of like best of luck. Like I don't know. Oh, you're hungry? Go find something. Like,
Mhm.
and actually, I would say so. I've talked about my kids like to get up in the morning and watch TV, and I have probably had all of these styles in the like my kids wake up earlier than we do. in that category of our day, I've maybe had a little bit of all of these styles, right? That sometimes I've been like, yes, here are choices. These are the things that we're gonna offer. Versus sometimes it's like, no, you can have this and only this. You can have one, right? I've been very controlling about it sometimes. Sometimes I've been in that indulgent of like, I mean, I'm tired. Just do whatever you want. Like, go find
Mhm.
something. Oh, I have a story that does not my best moment.
Let's
I
hear it.
literally came downstairs one time to our kids eating granulated sugar.
Interesting.
Like
Mhm.
the sugar tub
Yes.
in the living room. Scooped hands. Scooped hands. Yeah. Oh, it was a lot. That Yep, so there's been times when definitely been indulgent of like, yeah, and I mean that wasn't ideal and we had to change some things. We responded to that, but that was something that happened. And then yeah, sometimes yeah, when I have a kid that decides they need a snack at 2 a.m., tired Mackenzie is not a reliable parent. Like, I cannot be trusted at 2 a.m. And yeah, okay, they went downstairs and they found some, like, best of luck. Yeah, if you're hungry, go get something. So I've been all of these probably at different points.
Mhm.
But we're feeding style is more about a general, right? Like a general belief and attitude, right? Like,
Yeah, yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, I think you make a good point. It definitely seems like you can shift between them, but I think coming back to it, all the things it sounds like, you really do reflect that authoritative style where, yeah, you're setting that boundaries. Like, we probably shouldn't just be eating raw sugar in our living room,
oh.
for many
For
reasons.
I'll
It
say
sounds
for a lot of reasons.
yeah.
Ants being one,
That's exactly what I was thinking of.
mess. There's a
Like, the
lot of
mess
reasons
of
for
it. I
shouldn't
was
do that.
also thinking about my dog potentially getting into it. That
Oh,
sounds
yeah.
really awful, but, so
Mhm.
providing that structure of, "No, we shouldn't do that," but not maybe being, punitive in the fact, like, "Okay, well, you did this, you can't, do something else."
Yeah,
So
now nothing in the morning or
yeah, yeah,
mhm.
exactly. So maybe there's you can pull different feeding styles into what you consider you're doing. But I think in general, it sounds like your attitudes and beliefs really come from, oh, I'm trying to guide them in the right path on what to eat, provide them structure because they do get up in the morning and you've talked to me about you have the Bodo box kind of
Y
style in the morning where you have an option or
yes.
you do lay out food for them but you
Yes.
also you do that preemptively because you're not gonna get up to help them, right? So you are
Yes.
you are providing structure, but then
Right?
also autonomy within that structure. So
Yeah,
I
and
think
so I have in, like, the last few months, our strategy for, "I'm not getting up at 5 a.m. with you," and I am really bad because I don't go to bed early. Like, if I could get myself that's a whole other thing. Okay, but so I don't wake up when they get up at 4 or if one of them does, and, but yeah, so we've just got little, like, cheap little containers, and then on Sundays, we set up the food for the week, so each container is like a breakfast for the morning, and so I try to like, these are the food groups that are gonna be offered. You could choose, like, an applesauce, or you could choose an apple, or, those are kind of the same thing, like an applesauce or even, like, dried fruit.
Mhm.
Um or yeah, like a carb, so like a granola bar, a like little thing of cereal, whatever. And then usually we try to do like some kind of protein or dairy of like a beef stick, a cheese stick, a yogurt, like. But so it's like okay, those were the categories. So that was the structure I was providing, and like here, and so they can get up in the morning and get themselves, whatever that box is gonna look like, and so that was kind of our balanced way of, oh yeah, that is just it's a little chaotic here in the morning, guys. It's a little chaotic.
Yeah, well, 5 a.m. is early, so
Yeah. Yeah. Very early for me. But yeah, so those 4 different styles, and I do think there's a little bit of grace in that for us as parents too, that, like, when we think about styles, we're talking about generally, right? Like, I know even when I am if I'm, like, with friends or family and I get caught up in doing something fun, yeah, my control and authority over what my kids eat, I can get distracted. Like, but in general, what we strive for and what our general beliefs are around food is what has the most impact, right? Not those kind of exceptions.
yeah.
Or at least
Yeah.
I hope. Maybe I'm just like telling myself a nice story about it.
No, I mean, we can't be with parenting styles, so you can't be perfect all the time, right?
Mhm. Yeah. Thank goodness, right? Thank goodness it's the general experience. Because I do think, I mean, this might be an assumption, but I feel like for many parents, the goal is to raise like a healthy kid. You talk about
Mhm.
raising like a healthy, independent eater. And I do think that's to some level on a lot of people's radar is like, well, yeah, I hope they are like none of us want kids that aren't healthy when they grow up or even as kids want them to be healthy. healthy. And so let's talk a little about like the outcomes associated with these feeding styles, because that's honestly, like we talk about research and reality, not just the styles themselves, but what's the impact of them? Like are the outcomes? How does it affect our kids?
Yeah. No, definitely. And one of the great things about feeding kids, feeding styles is there is a wealth of research and literature out there for us to pull in to talk to you guys about today. So, 2013 review of literature on the influence of parenting style and feeding styles on childhood health outcomes found that across different parenting and feeding styles, it was really the authoritative style. So that
Mhm.
high demandingness, high responsiveness appeared to be the most protective parenting and feeding style. So what I mean
Mhm.
by that, it just was associated with the best outcomes in terms of kids having a better diet quality and that kind of
Mhm.
thing, better eating behaviors.
Yeah.
So, on the flip side of that, the indulgent feeding style was consistently associated with the more negative health outcomes.
Mm, yeah. And it's interesting to me, the authoritative, right? Like that tracks with what we understand about parenting styles and the research
Mhm,
around them. And the research around feeding styles, like from the report that you sent or that I was reading that you sent, like looks like it's even more like solid, right? There's like really consistent research around authoritative feeding styles having positive outcomes for kids' health. Um, I I do feel like I was a little surprised that indulgent was the most associated with negative outcomes, because I could see, downfalls of the different like of the different styles in other ways. Like, well, if they're uninvolved, do kids like feed themselves enough, right? Like, are we
mhm,
underweight or like, but there's outcomes across all of that. But that the indulgent was associated, I mean, right? It says a little specifically, it was like problematic eating behaviors, poor diet quality, higher weight. Like, yeah, there was just a lot
yeah.
negative outcomes for our kids.
Yeah, and I
And
think
go
oh,
ahead.
go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say, I think of that indulgent style. One of my friends, she would hate that I'm telling this story. When I think of the indulgent feeding style of our kids, my friend tells this story about she would go to visit her grandma, and this was like once a year. Like she'd go stay with her grandma who lived far away in the summer, and she talks about, yeah, she's like, yeah, I remember I was eating chocolate chips for supper in the bathtub.
Mhm, very indulgent. Mhm,
Very indulgent, right? Very
mhm,
indulgent. And so obviously it's not always that extreme, but just that idea of like, yeah, have whatever you want, however you want. And if that is the regular experience of a child, right? That like as if I get to know food that way, like, yeah, you told us last week that we're predisposed, like our
mhm,
bodies are naturally gonna want that sugar. And yeah, and if we never, I don't know if curb is the right word for that, but if we never like foster interest in anything else,
mhm.
sugar alone is not enough for our bodies, right? We need protein, we need like other stuff.
Yeah, no, and yeah, I think that's a perfect way of thinking of why indulgent is likely associated with the worst outcomes is because what indulgent is, it's remember it's that low demandingness but high responsiveness. So
Mhm.
it's a lot of that warmth. And as parents, if you see your kid liking um, what would be considered the unhealthier options,
Mm.
but you want to be responsive to them and you want to make them happy, then you're going to
Yes.
continue to give them the food that they are going to be more likely to like because it tastes better to us, right?
Yes.
Versus the things that maybe don't taste quite as delicious to us. So I think
Mhm.
that's probably why indulgent is the has the highest association with those poor health outcomes.
Yeah. Um, and as you said that, that kind of you talking about wanting to like, yeah, we want our kids to be happy. Like, oh yeah, enjoy. I
Mhm.
think there can be a lot of reasons why, like that, a lot of things that inform our style are like our feeding style. And I think, what do we bring to the table? I was talking to Lindy about this. What do we bring to the table? Right? That's the name of the episode. I'm like, baggage.
Yeah.
We bring baggage to the table
Mhm.
in some cases because, yeah, maybe my inclination toward a feeding style might be indulgent because maybe growing up, my parents were so strict with food that the
Mhm.
pendulum has swung so far that I'm like, I never want my kids to feel like that. I want them to know there's lots of different stuff they can have, not just so strict. And so, yeah, and so then I'm indulgent. Or
Mhm.
maybe I even think about like if you've had a strained relationship with your child, maybe related to custody or there was separation from a time from your child, and thinking about like, well, yeah, when we're together, I don't want to upset them. I don't want to fight about it. I just want to have we only have a little bit of time together, and so then
Mhm.
we just indulge. And or offer that indulgence. And I think the same thing can be said for like authoritarian
Mhm.
styles. I even think of the way I was raised. I was typically a part of that clean plate club, if you will, that I was expected like the food you put on your plate needs you need to eat all of it. But I also know my mom grew up with a lot of food scarcity. They
Mhm.
didn't always have food. I've heard her talk about eating like bread and lard sandwiches because that was it. Like that was all they could have like afford for the day. And so I know that like yeah, the clean plate club of you need to get every calorie, you need to get every crumb because we might not have food tomorrow. Right. And so I think there's things that can influence these styles that are not just like, yeah, sure, good outcomes with authoritative. Just do that. Okay. It's
Yeah.
like, well, it's a little more complicated sometimes. I
Oh,
think it's
yeah.
important that we acknowledge that too.
Yeah, again, these we're talking about feeding styles today, which is your own attitudes, your own values around feeding. So those are influenced if we think about the model we talked about last week about what influences what kids eat. Guess what? It influences what we eat too. So we are
Yes.
influenced by the circumstances around us, our community, our culture, how we were raised, different generations. So I think this is an opportunity for you to think about your feeding style. If you want, if you want a different feeding style, how we're going to talk about how you can actually do it here in a little bit. How maybe you
Yeah.
can some strategies for moving towards a more, authoritative if you feel like you're too indulgent, if you feel like you're too
Mhm.
authoritarian, something like that. So it's
Mhm.
possible, but yet, I mean, you're completely right, Mackenzie. There are so many things that influence, I mean, our ability to actually feed our children, not how we feel about feeding our children.
Absolutely. And so let's dig into this strategy uh because yeah, I really do love this strategy. I would say I learned it my daughter was maybe like toddlerhood, maybe preschoolish, and I do feel like it's literally changed like how our family operates or at least for me, how I operate around my kids and food. So tell us about this strategy for like making okay, feeding styles, it's like a belief attitude. What's one way we make this concrete?
Yeah, so there is a woman named Ellen Satter who's done a lot of research and writing around something called intuitive eating. And she
Mhm.
also talks about within this something called the division of responsibility in feeding. So this is where you, the adult, you're responsible, the parent, you're responsible for what a kid eats or what they're offered to eat, when they
Yes.
eat, and where they eat. So again, the what, when, and where.
Mhm.
I put the for me, for example, my child is 10 months old, so I put the food on his
Yes.
plate. I
Mhm.
decide he's eating at, 5:45 PM, and it's gonna
Mhm.
be at our kitchen table.
Mhm.
But it's the child's responsibility, my son's responsibility, to decide how much he eats and whether he wants to eat the broccoli or not eat the broccoli.
Yes. And okay, this is such a stupid thing. I was like, "Yeah, who, what, where?" No, not who. Not who. I guess the who is the child.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. But this idea of dividing that responsibility, literally, it, like, went from me stressing about, like, "Oh, how much did you eat? How many?" Like, "Just try a bite," like, pressure and I mean, pressure that I put on my child and that I felt like, no, 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 I want you to try these things. I want you to like these vegetables. I want you to like this kind of food. And all of a sudden it's like, you know what? I can decide what to offer. Right.
Mhm,
So that's how I like have always kind of conceptualized it, like put it in my head of like, I can decide what to offer. And yeah, and when we offer it, where we offer it. And my child gets to decide how much to eat or if, right? If they're going to eat any of it. Um, and I've even, heard this and the extended explanation of this kind of concept of division of responsibility of, you know what, if I get it on your plate, having it on your plate for a food that you've been maybe a little resistant to, that's progress. And you still get to decide. It's your responsibility. Am I hungry or not? Right?
mhm. Am I hungry? Am I not? Am I gonna eat it or am I not gonna eat it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so there's, again, division of responsibility. I'm responsible for some things, you're responsible for the other things. But at
Mm-hmm.
the end of the day, if we think back to how this relates to a feeding style that we would maybe want to emulate specifically in terms of if we want the best health outcome, so authoritative here, you're fostering that autonomy by letting the child choose what to eat, how much they're eating. But you're also that structure, you're providing that structure in the what, the when, and the where.
Yes, and I so that is a great balance of that responsiveness and demandingness, right? Like, so the responsiveness is letting the child choose, like, you're not gonna eat that at all, or you're gonna want a whole bunch of this. Like, my one of the things in our house is noodles. There's a certain kind of noodles my daughter likes. They're
Mhm.
fine. I like other noodles. Sometimes I serve the noodles she likes, and sometimes I serve the noodles I like, and sometimes when I serve the noodles I like, she does not eat them, right?
Mm.
And it's just like,
Mhm, mhm. That still
I
happens in my house as adults, so
right?
mhm, mhm.
Right? Like, I'm offering this. You get to choose whether or not to eat it. And, but the great news for me is like, I don't have to fuss about it, right? I don't have to stress about, you need to try this kind of noodle. You're going to like it more than you think, right?
Mhm.
Like, I don't need to add all of that. I can do things to encourage her to try it,
Yes.
right? That like gentle encouragement, but in a responsive way, right? Like responding to the cues and preferences of my child, but still holding the structure and the expectations. Just like,
Mhm.
oh, it really does take, I mean, I can't say all of the stress out of meals because I still experience some stress.
Oh, yeah. Oh gosh. I mean, food's never not gonna be stressful,
Right? I
so
mean, we got to prepare it, we got to clean it up, we got to have it, right? There's all of these things. But it is nice to remove that layer of, I don't got to worry about getting you to take one bite. Um,
yeah.
in the division of responsibility, I get to let that go. We got food sitting here at the table, or sometimes food sitting here in front of the TV, or sometimes, right?
Mhm.
Sometimes out to eat, sometimes at a picnic. Some I would say hopefully, fingers crossed, most often at the table. But yeah, but it can look a little different, but structure, right?
Yes.
Structure
Yeah.
and responsiveness.
Yes, yeah, trying to and I think at the end of the day, trying to take the anxiety away that you maybe feel as a parent around feeding your child, because I know I feel that about sleeping in my child, and I do my best to control,
Mm,
to regulate my own emotions
yes.
around how my child sleeps. But feeding is hard because feeding is, feeding we get asked at the pediatrician's office every time we go,
Mm,
here's your child on the growth chart. Here's how they're doing. How much are they eating? How are they doing with that? And so there is these outside objective things that we see that are saying, you know, whether it's someone actually saying to you or you thinking in your own head, I'm doing a good job feeding my child,
yes.
just trying to take some anxiety
Mm.
away from that your child doesn't have to eat that thing to in order to for you to feel good about their feeding.
Yes, yes. And I think, you're getting at that idea of how value, like, food is so has so many values to us. And I even think like I have friends who are like, "Oh my gosh, my baby's in the 98th percentile." Like, "Yeah, good chunky baby." Like, and that's celebrated, right? That body size
Mhm.
of their baby is celebrated. And sometimes it's because that child was maybe underweight at a time and they've worked really hard to help that child be healthier. But I've also had friends who are like, "Oh, they're just so tiny. They're like at 5%, right?" And that's a value, right? There are
Mhm.
different values around all of these things, but yeah, but the division of responsibility is like, I can release some of that,
Oh, yes.
right?
Yep.
I can
Mhm.
release some of that. Because a lot of it, let's be honest, most of it is not going to be within my control anyway. Um,
Mhm.
so like we said, all kinds of things influence our food, why we eat, what we eat.
Mhm.
So I think that brings us to our stop break talk time, Lindy. Mackenzie DeYoung, our producer, comes in and kind of asks us an off the cuff question here. So we take a break, take a breath, and try to speak eloquently.
Are you ready for this?
I'm ready.
I don't know if I'm ready.
All right, so you're telling me that when my kid asks for a cupcake, you can't have a cupcake, right? Is that what you're saying?
Hmm. No, no,
No.
no.
So what do you so when can they have a cupcake?
Lindy?
That's a the best thing I can say is it depends.
Yeah, always.
Well, I think setting those boundaries again with, we're going to talk. So this is a great setup for me saying, listen to the next episode where we talk
Yeah.
about food parenting practices. Um,
Mhm.
that will give you more strategies and actual tools for how to put these feeding styles into practice. But yeah, I think it depends. You don't want to say to your kid, you can't have cupcakes, but you don't want to say to your kid, let's have cupcakes every night for dinner. Or,
Mhm.
and I think because you've talked about that, it's like you go to a party and there's cupcakes there. Of course, yeah, you can have a
Yeah,
cupcake,
let's have a
right?
cupcake.
That's part of this celebration, this enjoyment. But
Mhm.
um, another part of it is if I'm at home, am I going to have cupcakes all the time in my home? So that's something we're going to talk about when we get to different practices we can put into place. It's like what food is available in our home, so that is it an option to even have a cupcake tonight? If it is in my house, then it is an option to have that cupcake tonight, right? But if it's not in my
Yes.
house, you're not going to have that cupcake tonight.
Mhm.
All right. So you're saying keep it in mind, stay tuned, and we'll get there.
Yeah.
Yeah, kinda.
But also, like, there's the options and that sort of thing. All right, I'll accept that answer. It might maybe the question maybe the question was something I should have asked at a later date, but
No, I think it's a perfect tee up, right? It's to say continue listening to this podcast and you will learn more. And also, it depends.
Yeah.
You can have a cupcake, but just maybe not only cupcakes.
Exactly, and I was gonna say, yeah, it's the balance of yeah, sometimes we have cupcakes with dinner at our house.
Mhm.
Yeah. Sometimes my kids ask, "Oh, can we have candy?" "Yeah, let's have some candy," right? It's not a matter of, like, always yes or always no as much as it's, like, providing structure to make sure our kids, like, that their bodies get what they need, right? Like, as a parent, I get to choose what to offer, and that I want that to be balanced.
sure. Sure.
Mhm.
All right. Well, I'll let you go.
Oh, yes. I mean, cupcakes on the mind. I would like a word count on how many times we did say cupcake.
Yeah,
It
me
was the
too.
example we
Mhm.
followed. But it could be as other things as like you could say strawberries. My child only wants
Mhm.
strawberries. That's the only food they want. My kid only wants mac and cheese. My kid only wants, yeah, whether it's cupcakes, whatever. The balance and the mix of, yeah, those two dimensions of I have authority, demandingness, appropriate expectations alongside responsiveness of like my child has some independence, choice, autonomy, and that I'm responsive to their cues and their needs. And yeah, that it looks different too. It can look different at different ages.
Oh yeah.
So we all have kids at different ages, and yeah, it's just a lot. So I think it's great, this week diving into these feeding styles. There's a lot of positive outcomes associated with authoritative, more negative associated with the indulgent, but we also know a lot of things are going to influence that beyond just, yeah, sure, it's just a choice and that's all I do. We know that there's a lot of what do we bring to the table? Food and
Mhm.
baggage and
Yeah.
reusable grocery bags, right?
Mhm. Oh
Reusable
yes.
grocery
Yep.
bags. That's the visual for today. But it is a chance for us to kind of reflect on our style. But next week gets even, right? This was like beliefs, attitudes. What's next week, Lindy?
Yeah, yeah. So again, this week we were talking more about those attitudes, beliefs, values around our feeding practices or feeding styles. And next week, we're going to talk more about how to actually put those into action, talking about our parenting feeding behaviors and
Mhm.
actions. Mhm.
Oh, it's going to be good. So, thanks for joining us this week on the Science of Parenting podcast. Remember that you can subscribe to our weekly audio podcast on Apple, on Spotify, whatever your favorite podcast app is. So, you can subscribe and then don't miss the rest of the episodes coming this season.
So come along as we tackle the ups and downs, the ins and outs, and the research and reality all around the science of parenting.
The Science of Parenting is hosted by Mackenzie Johnson, produced by Mackenzie DeYoung, with research and writing by Barbara Dunn Swanson. Send in questions and comments to parenting@iastate.edu and connect with us on Facebook and Twitter. This institution is an equal opportunity provider. For the full non-discrimination statement or accommodation inquiries, go to www.extension.iastate.edu/diversity/ext.